Hello, it's Corey Sigvaldason with the Hop Nation podcast. Very happy to have our very first guest, as this is the inaugural podcast for the Hop Nation podcast. I have my good friend Aaron Keith Hawkins on with me today. Aaron was literally the first podcast I ever did, and in that I said I would have him as my first guest, when we launch this month. So happy to have you, Aaron.
Corey, thanks so much for having me. I'm more than flattered to come on here and be the inaugural episode with you. It's always a blast talking to you. So thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. For the listeners who may not know Aaron yet, he is the author of the book $1 Million Influence and the Unbreakable Success podcast. And now, Aaron, this is something I like to ask a lot of guests. What was your motivation for getting in the coaching, consulting, and training field? And, what's that founder's story for you? Because you shared it with me, and this is a very interesting one.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Corey, it's interesting because in hindsight, even though I didn't traditionally, my traditional career, as you know, was in law enforcement. So I started that career back in 1995, if I'm brave enough to age myself here. So, and I'd always, I'd always, even in that career, I always found myself very quickly in a position where I was mentoring, instructing. I spent a lot of years teaching at the academy out there, and I thrived on that. It's funny, my wife asked me years ago, once I started getting promoted through the ranks, and I wound up being a desk jockey as opposed to the guy out there, fighting crime, so to speak. But she asked me one day, if looking back, what was the most enjoyable part of my job? And I didn't hesitate. I immediately said teaching, the ability to interact and just work with people and get them from point A to point Z. I always loved that. And this is going back years before, personal development this is back when personal development and the idea of mindset and motivation, all that stuff had nothing to do with my day-to-day life. I was a cop, and that's who I thought I was supposed to be. But how that transitioned into the work I do now was in 2009, I wound up waking up at 1:30 in the morning after pretty much a normal day at work. And I woke up at 1:30 in the morning. I remember I was laying on my side, staring at a wall, and I had this massive chest pain. I had this pain in my chest. It was like a 12 on a 1 to 10 scale. The pain's radiating down my arm. It felt like someone had stuck me with a hot knife in my chest. And I remember just being so groggy and confused. I had no idea what was going on. I was 36 at the time. And I remember I sat up, and I did what seemed to make sense at the time. Was I tried to get up and walk it off. Now, mind you, I'd been a trained emergency medical technician. I was cross-trained as an emergency medical technician at the time. So I knew intellectually my symptoms were heart attack symptoms. Ooh. And, the radiating pain and the extremeness of the pain. And suddenly it dawned on me that if I didn't do something, if I didn't wake up my wife who was sleeping next to me, and if I did nothing and I didn't wake her up, and I actually was having a heart attack and I didn't make it, the sudden realization came that either she or our 3-year-old daughter who was sleeping down the hall were going to find me in the morning if I didn't make it. And that really quickly sobered me up. And I realized that, as unrealistic as it felt at the time, it was so surreal. I knew I needed to do something. So I woke my wife up and said, "Babe, you got to call 911. I think I'm having a heart attack." She jumped out of bed, quite literally, grabbed the phone and looked at me and paused and just said, "Are you sure?" And it made me pause for a beat, and I was hoping the pain would just subside. And, I was trying to control my breathing and doing all the tactical breathing that I'd been taught, things of that nature, and nothing worked. So I said, "Yeah, you got to call." And I remember as soon as she dialed I watched her dial 911. It felt like I had this big dial on my back. with a label that said energy. And it felt like somebody was just turning that energy knob down, and I couldn't hold myself up anymore. And I collapsed at the foot of the bed, and I was literally on my butt, immobile. I couldn't move. My hearing went away, and it sounded like that sound that you hear when it's underwater. If you hear somebody talking underwater, you can tell that they're talking, but you have no idea what they're saying. It's just muffled. That's what happened to my hearing. My vision closed down to like a narrow gap, like curtains closing on the stage. And I thought that was it. And I was sitting there saying to myself, I cannot believe this is it. Like this can't be it. I'm 36. I'm healthy. I can't believe that it's over. And I remember the thought going through my head, repeating. It was like on a loop in my head saying, you could do, I could have done so much more. I could have done so much more. If I just had more time, I could have done so much more. And what changed, the reason that was a pivotal moment for me was not because of the dramatics of the event. It was because if someone had told me ahead of time that something like that would have happened to me, or if somebody had posed it to me like a hypothetical and asked me what I thought I'd be feeling in that moment, I would have initially thought I'd be terrified. Like, oh my gosh, dying like that and thinking you're going to die. I would have thought that in that moment I would be scared. And what was interesting was I didn't have the sensation of fear. I had something I totally didn't expect, which was this overwhelming sensation of regret. I had this massive wall of regret as I sat there, hit me like a truck. And I wasn't even sure why, because my life was, by all, fair standards, was great. My wife is amazing. We had a 3-year-old daughter who's just an angel. She was like our miracle child. My career was going great. I worked with people I considered friends and family. I had the house with the 2 cars and the dog and the child. Everything was the way it was. The American dream. Everything was the way it was supposed to be. And for me, it was actually a lot better than I ever thought it could be. For based on where I came from and my upbringing, I felt so blessed and still do. But I got hit with this regret because for some reason I realized in that moment, in like the blink of an eye, that I had just been settling for what came to me easily. I was on the rails. I was coasting. I was in my, quote unquote comfort zone. And I wasn't even trying to be better. And I certainly had the capability of being a better husband, a better father, a better employee at work, a better, servant to my community, a better friend, a better peer, a better mentor. There's so many things that I was good at, but I wasn't. I realized I hadn't pushed myself at all, at least by my standards in that moment. I was just taking what came to me. And it was so, and this may sound weird, but it was so embarrassing to me in that moment, even though nobody else was realizing I was thinking this internally. And with that moment of reflection, like, well, this is the end. And, it all came back to me and it just slapped me in the face. And, not to spoil the story, but I made it. I actually didn't die. I survived that incident.
Whole different podcast. This was the ghost of Aaron Hawkins.
I know everybody's on the edge of their seat wondering if I make it, but seriously, I wound up going to the hospital. The ambulance came, rushed me to the hospital. I did spend 2 days in the hospital. They quickly found out that I didn't have a heart attack, and what they ultimately believe I had was a mini stroke, like a TIA, it's called.
Okay.
But fortunately, I had, from then till now, had no residual symptoms. They basically, suggested a baby aspirin regularly and just, I had full battery of checkups. There were some things that happened health-wise afterwards. They thought I had a possible aneurysm. And it took several weeks for that to get ruled out. But when it all cleared up, it turns out I was fine and I was going to be okay. But and I've met since then, I've met so many people who have had these amazing stories of survival and things of that nature. And a lot of times you'll hear people say that they knew something had to change, which I totally understand. But for me, it was interesting. I didn't feel like something had to change. It was what I actually felt when that happened was I knew something had changed. Like it was something clicked in my head. And I realized there's no way in hell I'm going back to the way things were. I just couldn't. And that was a good part. The bad part was I had no clue what to do, what I needed to be doing different. So that began the journey, and that began the introspection and this journey of personal development and human performance and mindset and motivation and all these things that kind of culminated into this coaching and speaking and authoring career that at the time you couldn't have, I would have laughed at someone who told me I'd be doing now. I would be doing this stuff that I'm doing now because it just was not a reality for me. But I'm glad it happened. That was the best bad day of my life.
It was a catalyst.
Yes, that is the word I love to use. That was absolutely the catalyst to all this.
Yeah, and sometimes if we aren't getting it on our own, God, the universe, whatever,
sure,
provides that catalyst for change
for
us to open not our eyes or our mind, but more our heart to what we're being called ultimately to do. And it sounds like you've been able to dial that in and figure that out, which for anyone that gets to that place, as you know, Aaron, that's a great place to be, because that's where full contentment and fulfillment lie.
Yeah. And, one of the best things, one of the things, because a lot of times people ask me like, well, what did you do? How'd you know that this was going to happen? And I openly say I was clueless. I mean, I was clueless as to what I needed to be doing. My idea of what I should be doing had evolved so many times since that incident. But I just started doing things that were new. Like, for example, as soon as one of the first decisions I made was to go back to college. So I went back to school, finished my bachelor's degree, ultimately wound up getting my master's in leadership. And that my brain just wanted to learn. And then on parallel to that, I wound up I wound up when I came home from the stay at the hospital, and I had this this space that needed to be filled with something new. And I thought, okay, what do you do? Who do you turn to, or who do you read, or where do you learn what to do with your life when you know you need to change your life? And I drew a blank for a moment, and then all of a sudden, this name popped in my head and was like, what about that Tony Robbins guy, the infomercial guy? That was the only name I knew in the personal development world.
Well, it's the biggest name.
And that was the one big name I knew. So I sat at the computer, hopped on to Google, and I typed Tony Robbins, and I waited, and I typed scam. And I hit enter.
That's the cop in you.
That was
the critical set of eyes, right?
Well, it's funny because I think I'm sure part of that came from my background in law enforcement. So I'm always questioning. I don't want to be taken for a ride. But I think many of us in our own way, we kind of do that to ourselves when we're kind of hedging the bets. When we know we need to do something new, we know we need to make some changes. But in the back of our mind, it's like, yeah, but. And that was my yeah, but. It's not because I thought I would that there was anything wrong with Tony, or I had any reason to believe that there was anything wrong with Tony. It was that fear, that initial fear, like, I don't want to be taken for a ride. I don't want to be scammed. And what's this guy really about? Obviously there's anybody doing anything is going to have plenty of haters on the internet, but I was able to kind of weave my way through all the noise, and I just took a dive in, and I wound up getting his Unleash the Power Within. He had a CD box set on his website at this time. I don't know. I guess it still does. And bought it, had it shipped, and just devoured it. It was my listening when I was at the gym or running or working out. I would just listen to that. And for me, it was impactful. It was really impactful for me because I'm I can tend to be somewhat of a pragmatist, even as much as I love motivation and inspiration and all that, the excitement of human potential, because I think it's amazing. I'm also one of those things where if it doesn't make sense, then I'm going to have a hard time with it. You got to start me in the conversation with something that just makes sense. And that's a lot of what Tony was talking about in his program, a lot of what he writes about. I've plenty of people have listened to Tony, and I've certainly read a lot of his stuff. It made sense to me because I could relate to the things he was talking about, and the way it was practical. It really was. And from there, that hooked me into the world of motivation, if you will, personal development, understanding human psychology and behavior, why we do the things we do, why we don't do things that we should do. Yeah. And that, for me, that was the beginning of me understanding how I wound up on the floor in my bedroom thinking I was about to die and having tons of regret. It started answering those questions, and I started understanding why it's so easy to settle in and get comfortable and just leave things the way they are. It's one of the things that Tony said. I remember one of the first things that Tony said that it was an aha moment for me was that a lot of times the biggest problem people have is their life isn't bad enough to do anything about it, but it isn't good enough to be fully satisfied. And that's where I was. I didn't need to fix my life, but I did. If I was honest, I wasn't fully. There was a lot of wishes there. Like, I wish this was better. I wish that was better. But it never dawned on me that there's so many things I could do to actually make those things happen.
Absolutely. I get it. It's that need for continual growth and development.
Sure.
It's a human need and desire we all have. And I think when you lose that, it's a sad day. And I remember when I graduated from undergrad, I graduated with a guy who went back to school in his 60s. He graduated his undergrad when he was 67.
Oh, that's awesome.
That is an awesome, example. So you go through this experience 10 years ago. Bring us up to speed. You have a book, $1 Million Influence. I want to hear about the book, and I want to hear about the podcast, Unbreakable Success. Which one of those came first, and when did they come about? In the journey, but then obviously it's turned into a business and a career that's, transitioning you basically from law enforcement, which we were talking before we went live here. You're about 4 months from retiring and just doing this new passion full time and all in. Is this correct?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It's been something that for the past few years I've sort of been wearing both hats, and it's been great. I have to thank first and foremost my wife Kathy and our daughter Sophia. Because they've been, I can't imagine if somebody has more support for what only for many people it seems like some insane, crazy dream. If anybody has more support than I have, then they're lucky, because those two have really helped just hold me up when I've thought, like, is there any way I can actually turn this into a real, sustainable business? But what wound up happening, the podcast came first. After the event that I had, I was just devouring a lot of personal development books, everybody from Tony to Zig Ziglar to Les Brown, to more recent authors like Mel Robbins, the 5 Second Rule, Brendan Burchard of the world. And I connected with not only those authors, but also a lot of online marketers, people that were teaching how to take these things and create a business out of it. And for me, what wound up happening was the more I started learning about personal development and the mindset behind why we do the things we do and the tools that you can learn to change things, my life started changing. My marriage changed. My marriage completely, as good as it was, it evolved. My career completely evolved. I went from You know, a guy that took 13 years to get his first promotion to going all the way up the ladder in just a couple of years. It wasn't because I became some rock star. I just started changing how I showed up. And I started getting a lot more curious. And it really, when I saw those results and felt those results, and don't get me wrong, things weren't perfect. I certainly still screw up more times than I can count. But long-term, things were changing. And I'm like, wow, why don't more people do this and use this stuff? And I quickly realized, the light bulb moment came on, and I thought, I've got to teach this stuff. Like, I love teaching anyway. I always have. I've always loved mentoring and being that coach and being that, you know, that instructor, trainer, go-to person to help someone when they got when they have a problem or an issue or a challenge. And I couldn't shake the idea that I needed to share it. So what wound up happening, the first thing that happened was I started a website, which was horrendous, by the way, but I built my own website, bought my domain.
That's the big tip of the day. Start,
just do it. Absolutely.
Figure it out as you go along. You know, we're all going to fumble and stumble. One thing I want to pick up on to make sure and really reiterate with the listeners is the idea of you changed how you showed up.
Yeah.
I'm sure this is something you really stress with the clients you work with.
Yeah.
That is a really awesome tip. And I know how we show up, and it starts with our attitude, values, and beliefs.
Yeah.
Right. And then how we transcend that into our behavior, which is the showing up.
Yeah.
Because it's the iceberg model, right?
Sure.
People see the behaviors and how we actually show up.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what we're feeding in behind the system that drives that's a big deal. And, you know, obviously by digging in like you did, it opened up that. So how you showed up was different. And I really wanted to drive that point home because that was a real nugget that I want to make sure our listeners hear. Yeah,
thank you. You're absolutely right, Corey. That the decision to show up as someone is probably the most useful advice I can give someone, because, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, you're like, how do you stay motivated? How do you stay inspired to do all these things? And you're always so busy.
How do you get others to be motivated?
Yeah, how do you get others to be motivated? And by far, I tell people all the time, like, motivation's easy. You just have to choose who to be. You have to choose who you are. That's an identity issue. I always joke and tell the story that when we first found out my wife was expecting our daughter, we were so excited because it took us years to actually, you know, conceive. So we were doing everything. We were painting the bedroom and getting everything ready and buying furniture and all that stuff. We were so.
I thought you were going to take that a different direction when you said you were doing everything. I'm like, whoa, PG-rated show here.
Family friendly, Corey, I promise. So, we got so excited about this idea of being parents. So we did we went overboard. We were buying all the stuff for the room, the clothes, and, you know, I'm changing outlets and ceiling fans. And there was this energy that was just amazing because it was such an exciting time. And of course, fast forward, you know, our daughter's born. We have our little baby, Sophia, she's here. And now it's real, right? Now you're waking up at, you know, 2, 3, and 4 in the morning because she's crying because she needs to be fed and all that stuff, which is kind of cool the first few days. But, you know, after a few weeks and you're sleep deprived and you're, you know, like zombies around the house, it's one of those things where, to me, it's the perfect example of motivation, because at first we were doing all those things because of the excitement behind it. But there comes a time when you're not excited to wake up at 3 in the morning anymore. You're not, you know,
novelty wears off.
Yeah, you don't wake up and feed your child in the middle of the night because you're motivated, but you also don't consider not doing it.
Yeah.
And why is that? Why? I mean, you know, my question when I tell people this story, I'm like, why is it? Why is it so? Why do you not even question that task? Why do you just get it done? And I said, the answer is easy. It's because you're a parent. That is an identity. That is absolutely who you know you are.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are something, you will show up and do it, whether you feel like it or not. The motivation becomes irrelevant, completely irrelevant, when you decide on who you are as a person and what your identity is. And that's simply a decision. And when we transition something like that into other areas of our life, and okay, who am I in my career, and who am I as a friend or a peer or a manager, a leader, or an employee? When you attach an identity to yourself unconditionally, some days you'll feel motivated, some days you won't, but you'll always get it done. Because when you are something, you just do it because it's who you are, not because it's what you feel like doing. And that's the huge difference.
Absolutely. And I love this. And, as you know, in our conversations, my research, the work we do is high performance leadership. And part of that is success and performance habits. And you're talking about things that, are done, but they become habits.
Yeah.
What are some of, there's obviously the parenting example that you just gave, but what are some of those success and performance habits that you embrace and that, you would encourage maybe other listeners, or even tips on
Sure.
how to develop them? Because everyone wants to have the end result of the habits,
Sure.
but it's getting through the stage, the suck phase, where it becomes to that point of automaticity, where the habit of not doing it is stronger than the habit of trying to form the habit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have 4. There's so many different tips I have, but I have 4 things that I do that when I break down the 4 habits that I've seen, not just in myself and my own results, but just in the results of the leaders I've been lucky enough to collaborate with and spend a lot of time with from dozens of countries around the world. And it's 4 simple things. Number 1 is 100% responsibility, like acting as if anything that happens, no matter what it is, whatever circumstances you're facing in your life, personally or professionally, it's your responsibility. And when I say responsibility, I don't mean blame, because responsibility is the word responsibility. If we break it down to its roots, it comes from the Latin response, meaning the first piece of the word is response is about our ability to respond with our words, our thoughts, our actions. The ability part comes from a Latin word, abilis, I-B-I-L-I-S, I believe. And that just means capable or worthy of. So the word responsibility just means that you're capable and worthy of responding to any situation with your thoughts, words, and action. Responsibility is simply about what you're capable of.
Mm.
It's deciding that you can address an issue. And when you believe 100% of the time that you can respond to something with thoughts or words or actions, it's not about blame. It's about, okay, I can address this. Regardless of how it happened, what precipitated it, I can make a decision, I can have a thought, I can say a word, I can take some action to address this. And when you own everything, when you just assume it's up to you, it makes it easier, because you're not looking for anyone to blame, because you've already handled that conversation. Like, all right, what do I have to do to address this?
Yeah, I love it. And it's living into that what if possibilities. I talk about what if possibilities.
And it makes it so much easier. Like certainly for me in a workplace as an executive now in my organization, owning everything makes it easy, because then you're not looking for who to blame or whose fault is it. Yeah, that part's easy. You can always figure out where something happened. You can address those things from an operational standpoint, and from whatever it is, whether it's a policy issue or a performance issue, that's easy. But if ultimately I take the idea that this is ultimately on me to address, like I have to take ownership for this, it gets rid of so much anger, stress, and all that stuff, because it's not productive.
Worthless energy.
It's worthless energy. So if I got somebody at work with a performance issue or a problem, or some kind of admin violation or something like that, I'm not angry. It's on me. I gotta address it. I gotta fix it. And it makes it so simple. It takes a lot of the stress and the tension out of it. Quickly, because I said I had 4 things. The second would be unconditionally high standards. One of the first things I learned from Tony years ago was, if you want to change your life, you got to change your standards. That was one of the first Tony Robbins isms that I learned, and it's so true. But what I found over time and over the years, both personally and in my coaching practice, is that a lot of times for many of the people, especially the people I wind up working with, they have really high standards for themselves. They want things to be better. If somebody's calling me to be a client, they're starting out in the right place mentally. They already consider themselves a performer. They just want some assistance with it. And what I realize is the problem isn't just setting high standards. It's having standards that you consider unconditional. I like to use the analogy when nobody's impressed by nobody's impressed by you switching to becoming a vegetarian when you're at home. They're impressed when you go out with your meat-eating friends and they're all ordering steaks and you're having a salad. That's an unconditional standard. When regardless of the circumstances around you and what excuses you think you may have, when you stick to your standards, no matter what, and that's in a relationship, that's with your health, your fitness, your commitment to reading, the commitment to your business, the commitment to your clients, whatever it is, when you set some high standards and you make them personally unconditional, that's when things get different. That's nobody's impressed by, the husband or wife who comes home and is loving and caring when everything's going okay. It's impressive when somebody comes home and they're loving and caring and empathetic when the house is a wreck, the kids haven't done their homework, there's no dinner, the milk's gone bad.
Story, not the social media story, putting on your best face all the time. When
real life is happening and things are happening that you wish were not happening, and you still maintain, okay, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to show up. And I'm still going to be loving, and I'm still going to be empathetic, and I'm going to look to help to fix this and address it and give some support instead of flipping out and screaming about what's, everything that's wrong and the house is a mess and all that stuff. When you hold your standards of who you are as a person in a personal or professional relationship, no matter what, that's when you can develop that as a habit, that word unconditional, that changes everything. And that's when I see people winning, that's what they're doing. They're unconditional about the way they show up, as we said earlier, the way they show up.
For sure. And there's a certain level of sacrifice in that, like professional athletes and that. I've seen this where, they aren't going out with their friends. They're giving up part of their social life to maintain the commitment to their sport and the level of excellence. And I talk about this in HOP at the very beginning, this commitment to excellence, which is this, and you're calling it the commitment to high standards, which is highly related to your first point, responsibility. The minute you commit to high standards or a commitment to excellence, you better be having this accountability and responsibility on the other side. What's your third?
The third is something I call reflective comparison. And it's funny, you touched on something earlier that was really important related to this. You touched on the idea of just getting started. And especially in this industry, in this coaching industry, and, the authors and speakers that are I consider my peers in this world, and people like you that are just up to doing great things. Everybody's at a different level of their experience in time, or the size of their following or their exposure. And it can very quickly, it gets easy to be caught up in the game of comparison. But the one of the best rules that I follow, just as one of those things I have to do, it's called reflective comparison, which is in any given situation, if you were to look in a mirror and ask yourself, what were the best version of me do right now? If I didn't have flaws, if I didn't have ego, if I wasn't worried about what anybody else was or was not doing, what would I do right now if I couldn't get it wrong? And if I had no if I was literally incapable of making a mistake, what would I do? And that helps me, and that has helped me for years now, especially in business, really get rid of the noise. Because early on, I would, as I'm trying to learn what I need to be doing to do this as a career, I start looking around, and there's all these, these authors and writers and speakers and people on these big stages, and they got all these followers and they got all these books. And I'm like, who the heck do I think I am that I can enter this world and build this? I don't even know how I do that. I'm nobody compared to these people. Those are things we've all been there in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in business or life, where we're comparing.
I feel I'm still there, and I'm 25 years in this business and have been able to enjoy tremendous success, but 25 years in the business, and I'm launching my first podcast. Right.
Yep. But it's that next, it's like you said, it's the next step. It's what can I do? What can I do now? Instead of comparing myself to anyone else, if I look in the mirror, what would I do right now if I just couldn't get this wrong? And some days it's going to be, okay, today it's do this first episode. On some days it's going to be start the next book. On other days it's going to be reach out to this event planner, because you're in any given context, it could be something different. Even at home, if you're having one of those days where if there's tension at home and you're worried, you're frustrated, or you're angry, but just that simple question: what would I do when I walk in this house next? And when I walk in this house right now, and I know my husband or my wife is frustrated, if I couldn't get it wrong, and if I really stuck to my values and I did this right, what would I do? What would I say? That's when the baggage gets dumped, the ego, the story, who deserves what, all that gets shed away when you challenge yourself by a question like that. What would the best version of me do if I was just incapable of doing the wrong thing? What would I do? And I certainly don't always get that right, but man, hold myself to task through habit, through repetition of asking that question over and over again. You start hearing some really good answers. And for me, when it comes to performance, that's such a great performance question that I love to give myself and to my clients.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
I might borrow that.
Yeah. Hey, take it away, man. Take it.
That's awesome. So what's your fourth one? You alluded to having four. So
yeah, the last one is simply this. I call it elevating your situational methodology, which sounds fancy, but it's really simple. The premise is this: when we're dealing with any situation, most people do one of four things. They either do what's familiar to them, which is like their habits. You kind of just go on autopilot. They hope, they believe, or they create. And, there are times when doing what's familiar is the right thing to do, especially if you've developed some competency and things like that. Hope can be good, but a lot of times, and certainly I know you've met plenty of people like this, they spend their time hoping when they should be doing something.
Faith without deeds is...
Yes.
Show me your faith by your deeds.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I've certainly been, in plenty of situations where hope was all I could cling to in some moments. And we all need that, hope can sustain us in some of our toughest times.
When you're in the depth of despair, you want hope and need hope.
Yeah. Yes. So we clinging to that hope. One of the best lines I heard was from one of my first interviewees on my podcast. And he said, we can never lose hope. We simply lose sight of it. Oh,
that's great.
Yeah, I love, man. I mean, I'll never forget. He dropped it on me in the middle of an interview. He said, and this is a guy who was suicidal at the time, but it's something that he said he learned, as he went through his own personal trials. He said, I realized that we can never lose hope. We don't lose. We're never without hope. We just simply lose sight of it. But my point is, so we either do what's familiar, we hope, we believe, and believing is great. Tons of people that listen to shows like this or read the motivational books or personal development books. There's a lot of believers out there that believe they can do so many amazing things, and that's good. But if we think of these four things, the doing what's familiar, the hope, the believing, if we think of them as like steps or tiers on a ladder, at the top of that is creating. And so many people that I come across, the vast majority of people that I come across and deal with and that wind up reaching out to me or I get to talk to, a lot of times people get stuck in the world of just following their habits, hoping and believing, but sadly, too few people actually create their own situation. And I think if there's one thing that's different that has changed about me from the day I had my incident a decade ago to now, I stick with creating. Like as much as I can, whatever I can do to create a new situation, I just do it. At a good buddy of mine that he had me on his podcast a few months ago, and he said, "What's one thing you did? Like, how did you get so much done in such a short amount of time?" And I said, quite frankly, I just kept doing stuff that scared the heck out of me. I just kept doing it, and that habit of creation and creating when it's scary to do so, man, that's how people win, Corey. That's how you keep winning, is you just keep being willing to do and create something, create the next thing, little micro creations, doing the episode, having a conversation, being a creator by habit is one of the most
habit and practices.
Yeah, one of the most powerful success tools out there, whether in business, life, relationships, health, fitness. The habit of creating an outcome is just it's so extremely powerful. So that's it, is elevating those situational habits to where you just set your default at creating. What can I do to create something right now?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love it. And Anders Ericsson, literally the world's foremost expert on experts, talks about this and this concept of deliberate practice and doing little micro improvements that are laser focused with feedback and specific and difficult, but it's not huge jumps out of the comfort zone. The research says, 1 to 4%, 4% is kind of that max stretch. Beyond that, you lose some of that hope and believability, because if it's outside your comfort zone, you can't do it at first. If it's new, you aren't doing it. So you need to be able to somehow be able to persevere through the learning stages. Think of what it would be like if kids learning to walk, didn't persevere through as they're practicing to learn to grow and get better. They stopped after the first time they fell. But business and in life, that's the default. Right? People give up too easy or too quick. It's the two things that hold people back from success. And your 4 points really captured some fundamental success and performance habits that, like you said earlier, how Tony brings things in a practical perspective. You brought a practical perspective. So tell me about your book. I want to make sure we're able to, get listeners connected to you personally and some of your resources. So tell us about $1 Million Influence, when you put that out, what was the driver behind that and what it's about and how to get it. And we'll make sure we put a link below the podcast so people can access it.
Thanks, Corey. I appreciate you the opportunity to share. $1 Million Influence. The title is $1 Million Influence: How to Create Life-Changing Connection, Trust, and Impact in Your Business and Life. And I had, to be completely honest, I had no idea I was going to write this book last year. What wound up happening is when a couple of years ago, I wound up creating an online course, a personal development course, because I just felt like it was the thing to do. So I just did it, and I just created this thing, and it's this 8-hour long, monstrosity of a course. Great stuff in there. And the challenge for me was, from a business perspective, I wasn't sure how to market it because it's very broad. It's a very broad course, a lot of information in there, a lot of material, great stuff, some of my best work. I was so happy I did it. but I felt like something was, I felt like there was a way for me to draw something from it that I just wasn't seeing. So I tabled it for months, wound up coming back. And I realized that when I looked at the table of contents again and the breakdown of the course, I realized that the majority of what I was speaking about in that course that I created was influence. I was really talking a lot about influence. I was talking about human behavior. I was talking about how to be more influential, and I was talking about relationships. Those were the three big pieces of that book: is how to understand human behavior, what people's needs are, what our own needs are, and how we can use those elements to impact our business interactions, and how to impact our personal lives. And then learning the mistakes that most people make when they're trying to be influential, and then learning how to build relationships. Those were the three keys that they kind of just jumped out at me, and a little light bulb went off, and I thought, you really need to write a book on influence. And I mentioned, it's funny, I mentioned to my wife, I said, honey, I think I'm going to write a book, but I'm not going to write one that's very long. It's going to be short, like maybe a 50-page booklet, just something to give people that's an easy, quick read, and it'll be great. So of course she smiles and laughs. It's like, oh, here he goes again. He's doing something, getting into something else. So I started writing, and like maybe 2 days later, I don't know how many days. It was definitely no more than a few days after I started. She poked her head in the office, and she's like, "So how's that book coming?" And I kind of looked over at the shoulder, looked over my shoulder at her, and kind of had this embarrassed face. I said, I'm on page 112. I don't think I can fit it into 50 pages. So I wound up.
As a guy that owned a publishing company, you said it.
Yeah.
And
without
listeners will see that I chuckled, because I know when you say that, what will really happen once you dig in.
I did not mean to write a full-length book, but I did actually wound up stopping at 200, roughly 200 pages or so, because I just, there was certain things I just wanted to get in this book, and I wanted to make it quickly consumable. But that was it. That was last year, last spring of 2018. I think it was finally edited and finished up, and one of the best things I've ever done in my life. Not just because of how it's helped business. It certainly opened doors to speaking opportunities and things of that nature.
For sure.
But man, just from a personal confidence perspective, being able to do, like, actually sitting going like, wow, I'm an author now. This is really cool. And it's something that before I started doing it, I'll be completely honest, it scared me. It scared me because, it's really easy to start thinking, what are people going to think when they read it? What if they don't like it? What if it doesn't help? What if this? What if that? And I know those, I'm the coach, like I'm the personal development guy. So I know that stuff is nonsense, but even after all these years, those thoughts still creep into your head. And I certainly had a few of them, but when I have those thoughts, I know what to do. Just keep going. Just keep going. Yeah. And let the readers decide. So the feedback's been great. And cool thing is I actually, I didn't write it as a book to become an author making money as an author. I did it because I wanted to get it out there, and I wanted to just have I wanted to have a message to go out there. I wanted people to read it and use it. And like, we said a few times earlier, have something tangible, something practical that can be put.
It's credibility building. If you're in business, it's a tool that helps build credibility and branding.
Yeah.
And it also does something else, and you've alluded to this. It builds our own confidence in who we are, what we do, and how we do it, because it's part of that messaging. And you said, like, you press through doing it. And the passion kind of comes out of us onto book. And that's what authorship does.
Yes.
Right. Even in working with clients, right? You have people write this stuff down and make them do stuff, because the process of authorship helps gain clarity first and foremost. But there's accountability, responsibility, your first key success habit.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So I love how those two connect. Tell me a bit about your podcast, Unbreakable Success, and how long you've been doing that, and you continue to do it. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward. I know my podcast with you is coming out here shortly. So
Yes.
it would be
Yeah.
cool if we launch them, yours on mine and mine on yours, of both at the same
You know
time.
what? We might have to coordinate that. That sounds like that might be a pretty good idea. Yeah, the podcast I started 2015. Started under the title. The show was called, at the time, it was called "Best Life of Your Life." Was the name of the show when I started it, and that was, to be honest, I started it because I had my website and I was blogging and I was doing some articles on personal development, and I do enjoy writing, but for me, it's easier for me to just speak. I love having the conversations. As much as I consider myself a bit of an introvert, like I love my time to myself. I enjoy conversations. So again, back to the topic of doing things that scared the heck out of you. I absolutely could not stand the sound of my voice. But I'd found the world of podcasting. I'd been listening to some shows like Chalene Johnson's Build Your Tribe, and I think Lewis Howes had just started his School of Greatness podcast. Brendan Bashar had a podcast, and I was loving podcasts as an information source and another alternative to reading books. And it didn't take me long to realize, hey, I should do a podcast. And then I thought, hey, you can't stand how you sound. What do you mean do a podcast? So I'm having this argument with myself. And so, of course, I had to stay true to form. I thought, well, if it's scaring me this bad, then I should probably do it. And I just did. And I started recording, and I reached out to some, I didn't know what I was doing. I reached out to some best-selling authors and stuff to have them. Shannon Kaiser, God bless her. She was one of my first guests on the show. She's an amazing author. And I just started reaching out to people saying, hey, I'm, crazy little me over here I'm starting this podcast, and will you join me? And it was really cool to see how many people just said, I'd love to. And
That's awesome.
I met some of the best people in my world I've met through podcasting. You, case in point. I just kept meeting amazing people. And last year, or the year before, I changed the name to, I did a name change to Unbreakable Success. Because that really is more definitive to the work I do, and the work I do with clients, and what my brand is about is just having this mindset of unbreakable mindset. By to me, it's about preparing for life, proactively prepping your skill set, your mindset, your tools, and your expectations, so that you know that challenges are going to come. But when you're prepared for them, they don't matter. Like, your problems can't break you when you know they're coming, because you're prepped. It's pre-planning for me. And maybe that's my tactical side, my years of law enforcement and years on the SWAT team. I just have this mindset of prepare for it. Just prepare. Whatever you prepare for, you'll be able to handle. And that certainly has transitioned into the work I do as a coach, and the things I share as an author, and the conversations I have on the show with guests like you that just share so much great stuff and give the listener some tools, some usable tools that they can take with them into their business world and to their home life. So yeah, that's what the show's about. I love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, because you were an inspiration and kind of a fire under my own butt to get going after people asking for it. And
sure,
I'm very grateful and blessed to have so many people within my network, and to be connected with great people like yourself and Jocelyn Duffy, Nicole Jensen, and people like that. Just so many awesome people that to be able to connect these friends and people I know to others through a medium like podcasting. I get why you started and do it, and why everyone who's in the business says, as much as we're putting something out that's for others, there really is this intrinsic motivation, because we get so much out of it ourselves. And I've picked up a ton of nuggets today from you, and I want to be respectful of your time and our listeners' time, but I have one more question for you, just in the last little bit of time. And it's this: if we're sitting down, you're sitting down, it's your 100th birthday celebration. What do you want people saying about Aaron Hawkings at his 100th birthday? And, is there anyone in particular you want to have saying something?
Absolutely. There's two people that I would love to have speaking. One is my wife. The second is my daughter. And I giggle thinking what we would look like at 100. That should be fun. I hope I get to find out.
There's probably an app for that.
Yeah, there's got to be. If not, we need to make one, you and I.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah. But what would I like them to say? I would love for them, to me, it would mean a ton if they shared just some sentiment to the effect that they recognize that so much of what I did was terrifying, but I just kept doing it because I knew it mattered. In some way, I truly believed it mattered, and I did it anyway. Because to me, that's the best lesson I can give to my daughter, is to just, it's okay to be scared out of your mind, but if it's something you truly believe in and it's something you think is going to not only benefit you but benefit someone else, you better do it. And that drives me, the importance of setting that example, especially to our child and to the people around me, to do that, as to have the opportunity to set that kind of example, that you don't need to be fearless. The idea of fearless to me is just so ridiculous. Because if you're trying to be fearless, you're fighting a losing battle. That's just silly. You just need to learn how to handle fear. Just think of how to think of fear differently, because that's what changes it. I don't try to get rid of fear. I don't try to not be scared. I just have a completely different conversation about it. When I feel fear and I'm getting nervous, I'm like, well, it's game time.
Bite down on the mouth guard and go shoulder forward.
Yeah, you just got to go through it, just embrace it, and turn that fear into excitement and just go. It's what I do every time I get on a show like this. Every time I still feel the same energy that I used to feel years ago when I first did my podcast episodes, and the first time I stepped on a stage, and the first time I did an interview on someone else's show, whether it be on TV or on a podcast. The energy is the same. My interpretation of it is different, though. I like to call it excitement.
That's excellent. I love it. It's just a transfer of energy.
Sure.
Right? And focus.
Yeah.
It's a transfer of focus and energy. So I love it. Aaron, I really want to thank you for so much more than just being a guest here today. Love how you love your wife and daughter, first and foremost, as a husband and a father. I love it. And I know Sophia is the Latin word for Sophia is Sophos, I believe, which is love. So the fact you have that picture right behind you, the word love, I know that's what I respect most about you. The fact that you're doing stuff that matters, and at your 100th birthday, that's what you'd want to do, that you stepped out despite fear and did some, things outside the comfort zone, but did it anyways because they mattered.
Yeah.
Ralph Waldo Emerson said something that, at the end of our life, it's not really, the things that matter are that, at the end of our life, that what we did, it wasn't in vain. That, what we did mattered to this world, and obviously what you do and are continuing to do matters. And I thank you for your time and your friendship, my friend.
Thank you, Corey. I sincerely, coming from you, that means a ton. And thank you for doing the work you're doing. And I'm excited to see the show continue to grow. I'm excited to see you being somebody that's hosting something like this. It's amazing. So thank you for your friendship. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm glad to know you.
You bet. Looking forward to connecting and sharing the stage with you here in the near future.
Absolutely. Sounds good to me, my friend.
Okay. Thanks, my friend.
All right. See you next time.
Thank you, listeners, for listening in on the first ever Pop Nation podcast. Have a great day.